As we await that press conference by President Biden, there are new developments tonight in an effort by House Republicans to fine the Attorney General over his refusal to supply audio of President Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur. But an even bigger challenge to the president is coming from a powerful committee. Correspondent David Spun has all the details for us. Good evening, David.
Hi, Shannon. House Oversight Chairman James Comer doubled, even tripled down late this afternoon with his efforts to try to prove to the American people that President Biden is not up for the job. Comer is taking his fight to the White House after issuing subpoenas to 3 top White House officials, including aides Annie Tomasini and Ashley Williams, also a senior advisor to the First Lady, Anthony Bernal.
These 3 staffers have been identified by several sources as the gatekeepers for Joe Biden. We want to know if there's been a cover-up.
The administration slammed Comer in a statement, writing, quote, his partisan attacks on the president have been discredited, and now he continues to debase the House by weaponizing subpoenas to get headlines instead of seeking information through the proper constitutional process. Comer's doubling down comes just hours after House Republicans failed another effort to embarrass the president. Late this morning, the House failed to pass a vote to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in inherent contempt. Republicans lost the effort by 6 votes. Republicans wanted Garland to personally pay $10,000 a day, every day, he did not turn over an audio tape of an interview between then Special Counsel Robert Hur and President Biden from last October as part of the Biden classified documents probe. The president invoked executive privilege over those tapes, and Garland said his hands were tied. Hur made it clear Biden was confused at times during the interview and didn't remember specific dates, including when he was vice president. Republicans hoped the audio would prove more of what was seen at last month's debate in front of millions. That fight will continue in a courtroom, not in Congress, and a judge will decide whether Republicans will get a hold of that tape after all. Shannon?
Yeah, and you and I both know that final decision probably won't come until after the election in November.
Exactly.
But we know you're on it. David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're back with our whole panel: Juan Williams, Mark Thiessen, Josh Kraushaar, Karl Rove, and Harold Ford Jr. as we await this press conference from President Biden. I want to get to something the New York Times is reporting on about the campaign is now actually testing Kamala Harris, the vice president, versus former President Trump. Say this: under siege from fellow Democrats, President Biden's campaign is quietly testing the strength of the vice president against the former president in head-to-head survey of voters. The effort comes as some longtime aides and advisors to Mr. Biden are said to have become increasingly convinced that he will have to step aside from the campaign. Karl, you know what it's like to be inside a White House and campaign strategy. What does this say to you that this is now leaking out to the New York Times?
Well, first of all, we don't know if it's actually happening or not. But look, we know what the numbers are. Take a look at all the national polls. Vice President Kamala Harris's favorables are lower than Joe Biden's and Donald Trump's. We saw what kind of a candidate she was. She ran for president in 2020, and she was a dreadful candidate. And really, we're going to replace Joe Biden with his vice president, who's been in charge of border policy for the last 4 years. How's that been working out? Talk about elevating an issue and putting it at the centerpiece of the campaign. That would do it. So she may not be able to be replaced if he decides not to run, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of sentiment inside the Democratic Party to elevate her to the top slot.
But Harold, very messy if they don't. I mean, you've heard Congressman James Clyburn. He was responding to a question about whether he thought a mini primary kind of thing would be necessary. He says he's still with President Biden, but he likes the idea of several candidates mixing it up potentially if President Biden steps away from the ticket. But how tricky will that be for Democrats?
You know, I don't think it will be as tricky as some suggest. I listened to the arguments about the how hard and how messy it might get. And I think Democrats are coming to the realization that the real hard and messy part would be if we go down a path and we lose to Donald Trump. Now, that also incorporates whether or not it should be Kamala Harris. I think Karl raises some interesting points and maybe valid points. But she's not been at the top of the ticket. We find ourselves, those of us who are invested heavily in politics and following this day to day, that we realize that a lot of Americans don't. A lot of Americans don't pay as close attention. So perhaps a reinvention, a representation, a reintroduction would be in the cards for her. But I think the larger issue is what Jim Clyburn raised. I think a mini primary. I think having whomever those candidates, if President Biden decides not to run, those candidates who wish to run, who maybe gather a certain number of votes or certain number of support, amount of support in a poll, would be able to go before the various delegates, because at the end of the day, the most important people in this conversation are the delegates. Do they stick with Joe Biden? Do they decide to go to Kamala Harris? Or do they go somewhere else? And I think that delegates, we'll have to listen to them. Whom do they want to hear from? What size of a group of candidates or slate of candidates they want to hear from? So to me, that's more important than some of the other analysis.
Well, Josh, how likely is it that something like that would happen? You got a lot of lawmakers and governors and people who are kind of on that list, but I mean, we're just weeks away from the DNC. I don't know how much of this you could do in an orderly fashion.
No, I mean, if Biden stepped aside, the fantasy politics that a lot of Democrats are talking about now, I think are logistically really, really hard to do. I think Kamala Harris would have to be sort of the natural successor if Biden did willingly step aside. And I would think it would be most likely he would endorse his vice president. He's been saying so many things about her. That's why I picked her in the first place, that she's ready for the job. You would think that would be the most logical conclusion. The problem with Kamala Harris, though, is that she might excite the progressives a little more than Biden can. She might be able to drive a message home more effectively than the president can. Like, Biden can't move the numbers. He's just inability to really dominate the news cycle in a way that a more vibrant candidate could. But boy, among moderates, among swing voters, the Midwestern states that are going to be so important, it's going to be hard to see Kamala Harris being successful.
And it's really hard to do hypothetical polling, too. And a lot of people have a bit of a honeymoon until they actually get into the guts of a campaign and are getting beaten up all the time. So, okay, panel, don't go anywhere. We've got a lot more for you. That's up next as we stand by for President Biden's press conference.
I was hoping I was going to be able to squeeze this in before 6:55 Eastern when I've got this guy coming in for mic check, and we're going to have him for an hour. So I hope this thing gets started. But if not, however you're watching this, we'll be back with Christian Lamar.
Let's put Josh Shapiro on the ticket, or the governor of Kentucky, who's supposed to be a moderate. Let's do that. No, they're going to fight, and they're going to want to try and nominate a Democratic socialist. You're going to have a Democratic civil war with all the factions fighting for the public, and they're going to end up with somebody who's more liberal and less tested than Joe Biden even is. If that happens, it's going to be a mess.
A quick word
could I make one point on that? Could I make one quick point on that? One thing to keep in mind is of the 4,000 delegates to the Democratic National Convention, all but 43 of them were slated by the Biden campaign, which means this is not going to be a convention with 45% Bernie bros or squad members. These are going to be normal Democrats. And if nobody has a majority on the first ballot, on the second ballot, 739 superdelegates, sort of the House of Lords of the Democrats, they get to vote. And you talk about a group of practical Pauls who want to win elections. That's it. So I think there will be controversy, but I don't think this is going to be a convention in which Bernie bros and squad members are going to have much of a voice.
Well, somebody who is on this list of if all Hades, I'll edit it for you, breaks loose, is Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And she had something interesting to say in recent hours about the president.
What more should he do to shut this conversation down? Should he, as some people have suggested, just go ahead and take a cognitive test and demand that Donald Trump do the same?
I don't think that'd hurt, to be honest. But at the end of the day, you know,
so you think that he should take a cognitive test?
I don't think it would hurt.
Juan, do you think it would hurt?
No, I mean, look, I don't know. He says he's tested every day in terms of doing his job, you know, managing this NATO conference here being held here. But I think, again, the question's out there, so anything that requires, but the thing is, even if he took the test, then people would say, what doctor gave him that test? It was his doctor. Let's see this result. Let's see that result. Look, I just wanted to say a word on behalf of Kamala Harris. There is a poll today that asked Democrats, who is your pick if Joe Biden isn't running? 30% of Democrats, by far, the largest group, said Kamala Harris. Number two, Gavin Newsom was in single digits. So that's all Democrats. I'm not asking about a general election contest, but a Democratic contest. The second thing is, guess what? The number one issue for Democrats is abortion. Who's had a loud voice on the number one issue? It would be Kamala Harris. She would energize the women voters, potentially the suburban women voters, as well as the African American and Latino voters, in a way that no other candidate could. And I think people are underestimating the power and potential of her candidacy because they say, oh, she wasn't a good candidate in the primaries. But remember, she's won more votes than even Gavin Newsom out in California, and her stand as a prosecutor on criminal issues, she proved very powerful and very attractive even to some conservatives in the state of California.
Okay, Josh.
Shannon, can I just to echo just one thing? I think Juan is exactly right. And as much as I respect Mark and Josh's positions on what the Democrats should be doing in a Democratic primary, at the end of the day, let Democrats do what they choose. And if we decide to have a fight, let us have a fight. But Carl's right. If you look at the mechanics of it, it favors someone that is more moderate winning that primary. But I don't think there's anything wrong with 5 weeks of the country understanding the diversity of opinion in the party, the Democratic Party, the diversity of strength and diversity of geography in our party in terms of where our representatives and our senators and our governors come from. So I'm not afraid of a mini primary, and I don't think many Democrats are.
Very interesting. Okay, we are standing by waiting for this live press conference from President Biden as the world watches. We're going to take a quick break, much more with our panel, and we'll take you there live when that speech starts.
All right, well, I hate to do this to you, Twatter, if you're watching on X, but I got commitments. I was hoping to show you a little bit of this before we go to Christian Lamar, who I've had this scheduled for a little while now, so I certainly don't want to push him. He's coming up. We're going to do a mic check in 5 minutes. So unless a miracle happens and they get to this press conference, I just wanted to give you a little taste of it. I think we all know how it's going to go, but looks like I'll have to give it to you on delay if it's going to be there just for the sake of having it on the Twitter account, because we're going to be live with this man, Christian Lamar. He's from Arizona. He's got a great story, and we're going to get to that live right here, wherever you're watching this, in exactly 9 minutes. We'll be live, so I'll hold out and see if they're going to come back, but my hope is fading, as it always does, as they prepare the old boy for something important. Shit. Good night.